Good evening. Welcome to Intel 454, our week 4 wrap-up, intro to week 5. Again, I'll try and do these YouTube lectures every week and a half to 2 weeks or so, just so you get a little bit of face time and you get a little bit of my thoughts, what I see on the forums and later on in the papers, so you can get, again, a little bit more face-to-face interaction. But for now, I just want to start off with the domestic terrorism threat forum from the previous week, and just a couple of thoughts wrapping that up. The lone wolf terrorist, particularly the domestic jihadist threat, that is a recent phenomenon. We've seen some examples of it since about 2009. We've seen the Fort Hood shooting. We've seen the Times Square bomber. We've seen Boston. And these are, again, not organized Al-Qaeda cells, but inspired by Al-Qaeda, inspired by Islamic fundamentalism, operating. Some are U.S. citizens, some are U.S. naturalized citizens, but they're operating here, and they're being taken advantage of by some of the Al-Qaeda offshoots. More troubling than just the one-off incidents like Boston and Fort Hood is kind of the radicalization dynamics that have been occurring, again, since about 2008, 2009. We have seen recently people travel to Somalia and come back, participating with Al-Shabaab, and some of the people involved in the recent massacre in Kenya may have been Americans doing that, traveling from U.S. citizens, traveling back to Kenya and coming back and being involved with Al-Shabaab. We've seen other people travel to Yemen and Pakistan, again, U.S. citizens doing this. We've seen radicalization on the internet. We've seen people watch YouTube, or a spike in subscribers for people like Anwar al-Awlaki, the former head of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, who is a U.S. citizen who went over and became an Al-Qaeda offshoot. This is troubling. Anwar al-Awlaki, when he was alive, had more YouTube subscribers than President Obama. So we've seen that uptick in domestic radicalization using YouTube and other social networks to get out the message. So that is a phenomenon we've had in the past few years. And the question is why? Why have we had domestic terrorism incidents? And there's a couple of reasons. And before I go into it, I just want to kind of caveat this by saying the U.S. policymakers thought for several years that we didn't have, or that the Muslim population in the U.S. was well integrated. And that's why in Europe you had a problem. You had a problem with Islamic fundamentalism that you did not see in the United States. And that was our logic we had since September 11th up until 2008, 2009 time period. But that seems to, again, that logic has now begun to dissipate. And the question is why? And there's kind of three reasons cited. First, we had an economic downturn in 2008. We've had it for the last 5 years. Economic downturns tend to bring out the extremists, whether they're religious extremists or ideological extremists, political extremists, from the entire spectrum there. So that's one reason. The second is we finally now, and it takes a few years, to have a backlash among the Islamic community here in the United States against U.S. actions in Afghanistan and Iraq. This was one of the precipices for the Times Square bomber, for the Fort Hood shooters, that actions in Iraq and Afghanistan were a war on Islam. And even though that happened in 2003, 2004, the lagging indicator says that by 2008, 2009, then you'd have those radicalized factions. So that's number two. And number three is the boom in social networking that we've seen probably since 2007, 2008, between Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and then not only those social networks existing, but Islamic jihadists taking advantage of them. So a kid in Minnesota in early 2000s wouldn't feel connected to a guy in Yemen until those social networks came up, till again Facebook and Twitter started to become more mainstream. So those are that's kind of the reasoning behind some of the domestic terrorism threat. The question to ask, and this will be part of your papers and part of your final, is can you have a WMD threat from these folks? Reminded just in your reading, you saw that Om Shinrikyo had a pretty robust capability to launch their attack. It wasn't one or two people. It was a infrastructure, it was financing, it was logistics, it was people to actually execute this on the ground in multiple ways. And despite that infrastructure, they could only do a small, 15, a small attack that resulted in 15 killed. I think it'd be hard to imagine a lone wolf being able to do something like that. However, there are small WMD attacks a lone wolf could do. The Anthrax attack, 2001, some of you might remember that. That was now considered a lone wolf attack. A scientist in the U.S. Army Research Lab was able to inflict that. There's other things, ricin letters we've seen of late. Those were lone wolves. Again, not meant to do mass destruction, but meant to use poisons and biological agents to inflict harm on specific targets. So that's kind of what we will see as far as WMD usage by a potential adversary. So just going into next week, I just want to start off with some thoughts. Terrorist acquisition. Syria is in the news. People have said all over that Syria's chemical weapons present a threat to the United States. But do they? I mean, we saw the sarin attacks on TV, but is that feasible? That sarin can be produced by or acquired by a terrorist or non-state actor, transported to the United States, and disseminated without us picking up on it? Even if let's say a jihadist organization was able to take control of Syria, would they be able to execute an attack like that? Think again about the shelf lives of sarin and the difficulties of transporting and those factors when we're acquiring a device. Similar on the nuclear front, you hear nuclear suitcases, nuclear material being unsecure, but how hard is it to get it, and how hard is it to weaponize it? Again, those are just some thoughts to prime your brains to actually see the WMD threat in proper context. So with that being said, I look forward to your discussion forums, and if there's any questions or issues, please let me know.